Well, ladies and gentlemen, deepest apologies for the delay. Ben is now here. He was stuck on a train that didn't do what it was supposed to do. But we're now ready to roll. Ben Page is the Chief Executive of Ipsos Mori. As you know, he does a huge number of surveys for the NHS behind the scenes, some of which get published and some of which don't. But he's here to, or some of which only get published under freedom of information. But he's here now to reveal all to this distinguished and elite audience. Please welcome Ben Page. Ben. Fantastic, great.
Hello, this is a really weird room to do this. Because of the noise, you can't actually tell whether the audience are enjoying your crummy jokes or other amusing asides. So anyway, I will do my best. It's nice to see you all. Could we go back? Go back. No, back, not forward. Hang on, sorry about that. I'll just start again there. Back, go back to the first slide, please, whoever's doing the slides. Oh, hello. Great, okay. Now, there's lots of slides. They serve no useful purpose except to remind me what to say next. If you want a copy, email ben.page@ipsos.com and they will be sent to you. And so I will then assume that anything on the slides will be available to you and I can whip through it at 100 miles an hour and we'll all be very happy. And what I'm going to look at really is where we are now, because I think we should, in a sense, you should all be feeling really good, really, really good, because in terms of historic trends, things really can't get any better than they are today. And so, you know, after a long struggle, the public are now sort of happy with things, and it's really now a case of how we do things differently. But I don't think it's likely that the public can get any happier. This is the overall sort of trend in terms of what the public say they're worried about. We've asked the same question since 1974, and looking at the trends, you can see that anxiety about the NHS, or think it's a problem, is now quite low. About 1 in 5 of us say that's a problem. And over the last 13 or 14 years, what's happened is that other things have come along. Crime, of course, this is a country where our teenagers are revolting. One of the few things in Britain that everybody agrees on is that parents need to take more responsibility for their kids. Now, what we actually mean, of course, is that other parents should take more responsibility for their children. But we're absolutely obsessed about teenagers, disorder of all kinds. An issue that wasn't there in 1997 and is regularly seen as the second or third most important issue facing the country, immigration, and of course absolutely vital to running the NHS, but of course don't tell that to the BNP or far-right supporters. They like the NHS, they just don't like some of the things that are necessary for it. And then of course 2 more recent issues that really now explain why we are in the state we're in. This very high level of anxiety about the economy and a very high level, or a rising level of anxiety about unemployment. Now, interestingly, on that one, we ain't seen nothing yet. Those of us who were around in the early 1990s or the early 1980s lived through a period where I can't jump anywhere near high enough. It would have been off the chart. It would have exploded onto the blue stuff at the top in terms of anxiety about unemployment. So we aren't there yet in this recession, and it's going to be very interesting to see what happens. In terms of human misery, we're nowhere near it yet. So very interesting to see what happens if we have another negative quarter of growth, if the cuts and the job losses in the public sector aren't replaced by private sector jobs, who knows? But at the moment, it's all about the economy, it's not about unemployment, and public services at the moment, like the NHS, not particularly bothersome. Part of that is for this reason. This is the stuff that I'm allowed to show you, I think, by DH. He says checking around for anybody from DH, which show that at the end of 2009, we had one of the highest levels of satisfaction with the NHS we've ever seen. Compare that with Gordon Brown's government. You can see the government down there, the NHS up there. The fact that the NHS was being well run by the government got no credit whatsoever, and that's just one of the problems with voters. What they tend to do with governments is say something like, the NHS needs fixing, which is what they were saying in 1997. By the time it's fixed, they say, well, thanks for that. Now, sort this problem out. In this case, the economy or something else. But a very high level of satisfaction. Now, since then, satisfaction has started falling back a little. The reason? It is not that people who use the NHS are becoming less happy. It's people who don't use the NHS. Now, around 40% of us will go into use an acute service or visit an acute service in an average year. Obviously, most of us will see our GP. But satisfaction is falling at the moment, at this very moment, amongst non-users because of the argy-bargy in the media. You just have to look day after day at stories about cuts. But overall, it's still a historic high. And you know, there are some issues, you might say, where people are a bit more critical. Despite a record level of satisfaction with the NHS, one of the things that everybody also agrees on is that there is waste and inefficiency in the NHS. Now, as an informed audience, I like doing this one. Could you put up your hands if you believe there is waste and inefficiency in the NHS, like the public? Okay, this is good. So we all agree there's waste and inefficiency in the public. And as sort of informed and expert people in the NHS, could you put up your hands if you're confident that in 10 years' time there will be no more waste and inefficiency in the NHS? Okay, so, yeah, right, fine. But at the same time, you know, getting better at managing its budgets, well, 21% say yes, 45% say no. And then MRSA under control. Some of these things have improved, puts quality at the heart of everything it does, but quite a lot of disagreement. So we can be pretty happy with the service, but still worried about certain aspects. And one question we ask every few months is what people see as the biggest problems facing the service. And that is very, very clear. For this whole period where we've massively increased investment, the number one anxiety has been lack of resources. Because, of course, people are working hard, etc. Even as waiting times have come down, right up there. And that is going to be, you know, very interesting to see what happens with that in future. So people already thought the NHS was under-resourced even before some of the challenges that we now face. And I think this starts to paint some of the picture that managers in the NHS face as challenges. It's interesting, if you look at politicians, what they thought were the issues, we asked them last year, you can see that all of them also, including Conservative, Lib Dem and Labour, also thought the same problem was lack of investment and a lack of resources. But then big difference between Labour being very concerned about public health, government Conservatives at this point being very worried about the government's influence, targets, not enough patient choice, etc., etc. Bureaucracy, not a problem for Labour MPs, big problem for Conservatives and Lib Dem. So very different. Although we agree on the money side of things, it seems we don't agree necessarily on the solutions or indeed all the issues. And when we look before the election at some of the initial Conservative proposals coming out, what we saw was quite a lot of support for some of the things that Andrew Lansley was suggesting at that point. So more control to doctors and nurses, and generally if you're involved in change programs in the NHS, say it's all about giving power to doctors and nurses, and you will do well. People like the sound of that. The doctors apparently in our survey for the BMA this week didn't seem quite so enthusiastic, but the public like doctors and nurses. Remember, 94% of us believe that doctors tell the truth. The figure for journalists is currently about 20%, and due to a lot of hard work by Martin's colleagues at the Daily Telegraph, for the first time last year, ratings of journalists telling the truth overtook politicians, who only 13% apparently believe. So that's a challenge. Fewer national targets and more local control. The public like the idea of that, although they also seem to like 4-hour waits in A&E. And getting rid of managers, of course, in the NHS, reducing them by a third. What a splendid idea, because, of course, as we know, management in any part of life does absolutely nothing of any value whatsoever and can easily be culled. Freezing the pay of everybody who works in the NHS, actually not very keen on that, and given, of course, that virtually 10% of the UK population is either working in the NHS or married into it in some form, perhaps you can understand that.